I think a lot of people don't know this. The first civil war in this country started with a national divorce. The Civil War didn't start until after a national divorce already occurred. Now, it is fair to say that the Union did not agree with the idea of divorce, and so by force they said, nah, we're going to fight on this one. A lot of people have the misconception. They believe that the Civil War was fought over slavery. Slavery was the cause, the catalyst, as it were. But why did people actually fight? Oh, there's a whole bunch of other issues. And I don't think it's fair to reduce everything to slavery, but that is, come on. We're not going to have this debate. I've watched so many documentaries. And I know that doesn't make me a scholar or anything. And I know people have different worldviews and whatever. And that's fine. It's fine. I'll just tell you in my research and study, which is limited, as it were. I mean, it's slavery. It's obvious. States were concerned the election of Abraham Lincoln would result in the banning of slavery, despite the fact that Abraham Lincoln was mostly saying we're just going to stop the expansion of slavery. There was already fighting happening in the country between abolitionist forces and pro-slavery forces. And so eventually several southern states, I believe it was 7, said, whoa, Abraham Lincoln got elected? We out. National divorce. Abraham Lincoln said, you ain't going nowhere. And so troops, it started with Fort Sumter. Abraham Lincoln was like, there's no secession. You're not leaving. You didn't leave. And then Fort Sumter happened. Nobody really died in the conflict. It's like an accidental death. And then Abraham Lincoln's like, I think after that it was the Battle of Bull Run, which people died. And then Abraham Lincoln's like, okay, we're sending in the troops. Conscription. This caused, I think, 4 more states to decide we're leaving. National divorce was first. States decided we're out over conflict related to slavery. Newsweek reports, California secession movement wants national divorce to avoid civil war. And I've heard this over and over again. You know, friends of the show have said national divorce can be done peacefully. No, it can't. I will stand firm. I mean, people say Tim's a milquetoast fence sitter. I will stand firm. There is no such thing as peaceful national divorce. Water. Thank you and have a nice day. That's all you need to say. Different states have interstate water boundaries, and that's going to cause conflict. Already we can see in Africa, for instance, the Nile leads to a lot of conflict because the Nile, I believe, it flows toward the equator. It flows towards the Mediterranean. And so I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I'm not an expert on Africa, okay? But I was reading several articles about potential conflict looming because of what some countries are doing to the water as it goes into other countries. Now, of course, people will argue, Tim, it's entirely possible that if California secedes, they'll negotiate some kind of deal with Colorado, Arizona, Nevada over the use of water and what can be done to avoid conflict. Fair point. Then you've got weapons. You've got oil. Conflict seems inevitable because the federal government will be petitioned to stop the secession because it will result in a loss of resources. Imagine California, which produces most of the food, actually does secede. National divorce. We don't want to go to war. And now the rest of the states are saying our food prices are through the roof. They're going to say, send in the troops. Subsidize our food once again. Conflict and crisis seems inevitable. I'll concede there's a percentage likelihood, maybe it's a good one, double digits, that there's no war in the event of a secession or peaceful divorce or whatever you want to call it. I mean, national divorce. It could be peaceful. I think the overwhelming likelihood is that they'll be fighting. There will be. I want to show you a couple articles, and I want to have this conversation. Kristi Noem warns of possible civil war amid border standoff. Trump's potential VP pick says we would have war on our hands if Biden were to federalize National Guard troops being deployed to the border. Which brings me to an article I talked about early this morning. Alaska National Guard plans deployment to assist federal government on U.S.-Mexico border. They make clear this is not about defending Texas in Operation Lone Star. This is specifically about assisting the Biden administration. So let me see if I can pull up the Operation Lone Star. They may have updated the article. They always do this. Here we go. A spokesperson for Governor Mike Dunleavy in Alaska said the planned mobilization has nothing to do with Operation Lone Star. That is, these individuals who are being deployed and the materials being deployed will be to stand against Texas. Why would they do this? Now, many people have commented and said, no, Tim, you don't understand. They do this all the time. They do this all the time. The memo's gone out. They know what's going on. They know the conflict that exists between the Texas National Guard and Customs and Border Protection. And now they are bringing in out-of-state National Guard to stand against Texas. That's it. To help CBP. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that turns into. It could be anything. But I will tell you this. The Guardian reports from 1 year ago, more than 40% of Americans think civil war likely within a decade. More than half of strong Republicans think such a conflict is at least somewhat likely, poll finds. It's remarkable. This is from August of 2022. And you know, we talked about it when it came out. We went, whoa, civil war, civil war. I'd like to go back in time, my friends, to that year and 4 or so months ago, 5 months ago. And I want to ask you, at the time, go read the comments. You know what people are saying. It's remarkable. When we read this article in 2022 saying people fear civil war, we get a lot of comments. I'm not saying the majority of people saying it'll never happen. It can't happen. You're crazy. This is hyperbole. Oh, it's clickbait. Who cares what people think? It'll never happen. And boy, have I dealt with this every step of the way. And I will always give you this disclaimer. You know, maybe you're right. Maybe this all calms down. Nothing ends up happening and it's a bad hair day. Donald Trump gets elected, says, we love you guys. Democrats are great. We're going to hug. And then they all hug. And then everyone's like, why were we fighting? And then we don't fight anymore. I'm being a little bit facetious. Let's say things simmer down. Let's say the border is secured. Biden says, look, we're not going to risk going to conflict. The states pull back their rhetoric and things calm down. Totally possible. But here we are, once again, just over a year on, and we have a story that Alaskan National Guard is being sent to Texas to work with CBP. Texas National Guard is in defiance of CBP. And the Biden administration has given the Texas National Guard a deadline to which they dropped because of the conflict. Perhaps you are saying to me now, Tim, calm down. The National Guard does this routinely, and they're just going to help CBP with normal policy procedure. The 20 National Guardsmen are going down. It's for mechanical support, air support, helicopters. They're not going to be like boots on the ground armed with guns. This is what I find fascinating. Never have we experienced a story where the news was seemingly out of nowhere, 10,000 armed soldiers marched on Texas. Everything is always a grain of sand added to the heap. That's why I say that all the time. Alex Jones talks about it. Incrementalization, one small degree at a time. Could you imagine going back 10 years, maybe 10 years with 9 years with Donald Trump? He said there's going to be a civil war. They might be like, I believe it. But go back to like 2017, 18 and explain what's happening. Texas National Guard would repel CBP. The Supreme Court would side with the Biden administration, but Texas National Guard would refuse. 14 governors would convene to assert their right to defend the border and their states. The federal government would then send a memo requesting personnel from Alaska to assist the federal government during their conflict, with Texas. And you might say it's just logistical support. Nothing's going to happen. But what's the next step? What's the next thing that happens? Each day, they move 2 inches. And, you know, if you were to watch it in time lapse, you'd say, holy crap, you're speeding towards civil war. But when you watch it slowly, it's almost like it's not moving at all. And then you eventually get to the point where everyone's just like, it's entirely normal that these things are happening. If you took everything that has happened right now and slammed it into the United States on one day in 2018, the country would implode. The pressure would be too much. People would be screaming, civil war is here. Instead, because it's happened slowly over 10 years, people are like, it still can't happen. My friends, the breakdown is happening before our eyes. It's more likely than it's ever been. The polls weren't wrong. But I'm not saying it's a guarantee. Honestly, don't know. We've made the argument that we are in a civil war, perhaps. Maybe January 6th, maybe Occupy. You never know. I don't think Occupy. I think it's too long ago. But Bleeding Kansas was a 7-year period before the Civil War where people were murdering each other in Kansas over whether it would be a slave state or a free state. You had the abolitionist forces well before the Civil War engaging in murderous violence. You had John Brown. Crazy stuff. That dude was hoping to spark a slave revolt, but they didn't revolt. Then war broke out. Newsweek reports the leader of a California secessionist movement known as Yes California told Newsweek that a national divorce is needed to avoid another civil war. Yes California is currently campaigning on a ballot measure called CalExit 3.1, which would break California into two and establish a country separate from the U.S. in the San Francisco Bay Area and along the central California coast. It would be called Pacifica. So far, 92,000 people have signed up to join the campaign through the movement's website. It's unclear how many of these people are California residents. There are many secessionist movements in California. Some want the coastal areas to break off and the inland areas to separate so that there is a Republican and Democrat separation. Sure. I don't know how the coastal states would survive without farmland. The movement was founded in 2015 by conservative activist Louis Marinelli, who is the current president of the movement, and Marcus Ruiz Evans, who was a conservative talk radio host at the time. Evans left the movement in 2021. Quote, so right now, we're more working on the concept of national divorce as an alternative to potential civil violence and civil war in the country. Marinelli, I thought it said Martinelli. Oh, it is Marinelli, sorry. Told Newsweek via telephone on Saturday. Our belief is that there's a lot of growing political violence and political problems in the country that may lead to fighting in the streets. Civil war, too. Some people are calling for. We are trying to propose the idea of potentially doing a national divorce of some sort to avoid that type of situation. However, the legality of secession movements have been questioned according to the Supreme Court case 1869, Texas v. White. Individual states can't unilaterally decide to leave the Union. On Sunday, 2024, what did it say? 2024 GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley weighed in on the calls for Texas to secede, telling CNN's Dana Bash the Constitution doesn't allow that. I don't believe that matters. The Constitution says a lot of things. Biden administration doesn't seem to care. Presidents interpret what they want. But more importantly, the Crown did not allow us to secede from the British Empire. We just so decided to do it. Ulysses S. Grant wrote a great letter about this. I believe it was a letter, academic writing, whatever you want to call it. He basically said, oh yeah, anybody can secede if you want. And if you try, we will go to war with you. And if you lose, we will own you. He made a good point. He was understanding what it meant for the American Revolution and then some 80 years later, the Civil War. The American Revolution, we said, we challenge your rule and we seek to break from it. We won. Thanks in part to the help of the French, for instance, we were able to win. The Crown said, we don't care. We got so much other stuff going on with this British Empire that persisted for some time afterwards, by the way. That's fine. And so we challenged the established order and we won, and thus we were free. Ulysses S. Grant understands that. People want self-governance, so they will choose to break their pact. Some would view that as a violation of their oath and their debts, while others would view it as a fight for freedom. Every person is entitled to fight for what they want, and if they lose, they will be ruled by their betters, I believe is what he said. Something like that. And that's what happened in the Civil War. The South was defeated, and then the North occupied the South in Reconstruction. Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Georgia Republican, has used the term national divorce on several occasions, as we know. The last thing I ever want to see in America is a civil war. No one wants that, but it's going that direction and we have to do something about it. More recently, she wrote in an X post in December, soon national divorce may be our only option. Marinelli said that yes, California doesn't support a national divorce between red and blue states, but potentially there are ways to draw lines at other places. He explained that just by dividing the country by red and blue states, you don't alleviate the problem of the division between red and blue in any given state. Yes, according to Marinelli, yes, California is also keeping its eye on other secession movements in New Hampshire and Texas. Two pieces of legislation relating to New Hampshire's efforts to secede from the U.S. have been introduced in the State House. CACR 20 and House Bill 1130. CACR is a constitutional amendment that states that if the national debt, which is currently over $34 trillion, reaches $40 trillion, New Hampshire will declare independence. Meanwhile, House Bill 1130 would create a commission to study the economic, legal, and sociological factors of the state exerting its sovereign rights. Meanwhile, calls for Texas to secede from the U.S. have grown. This we know, blah, blah, blah. Oh, boy. New Hampshire, you're in for a wild ride if you secede. Where do you get your food from? You see, I'll tell you the benefits of a large United States. Most of the food is produced in California. We are able to grow things in warmer climates year round and ship those things to colder climates where it's harder to produce food in the winter. There's a cost to this, but this means that the labor of someone working in the winter can receive food that normally they have to save for, so the shipping and all this stuff, it works. Now, it's entirely possible that if New Hampshire secedes, they'll still trade and they'll still import food and they'll spend that money. I don't know exactly how it'll play out, but they'll be on their own. Federal tax dollars and mass spending have resulted in a high national debt. The U.S. just can't keep taking loans out to take this food and ship it around the country and subsidize these things. So eventually the system will break. New Hampshire's probably thinking, we're better off. Food's going to cost more anyway. With the national debt going this high, inflation's going to be through the roof. We may as well just work on our own. It's hard to know exactly how this will take place. Not the time for national divorce. They say, Marinelli says it may not be the time. We support the effort of self-determination in general. So if a state in the U.S. wants to pursue its right to self-determination and have a vote on independence that's going to be fair and free and conform to international norms with respect to independence referendums, we would support that. However, maybe right now is not the best time for us to be hashing out this domestic problem and divorcing the country when we could be mounting on a united front to face the global problems we currently face. Yada, yada, yada. He meant 2024 ballot. He says Hamas, etc., etc. But Kristi Noem's warning about it. Kristi Noem warns about it. A new poll from the Meredith. Do you see a civil war in the next few years? A poll of North Carolina. Yes, 38%. No, 38%. Excuse me. I can't tell you exactly what we'll see. I can just tell you it's certainly in mind. Top of mind, they say, right? At rally for border security in Texas, fears of invasion and civil war. A conservative convoy gathered on the Texas border to support the state's defiant stance on immigration. Despite worries over potential violence, the event was peaceful. Yeah, that's it. The Take Our Border Back convoy came in, and they were all very nice and peaceful, and they had a little Trump trailer. Talk of civil war is there, though. The question becomes, what drives us to the brink? January 6th? I don't know. Trump derangement syndrome. Woof. Media clashes. Let me give you, my friends, some white pills. White pills, optimism, and normalcy bias. The corporate press is in decay. The ratings are in the gutter. Timcast, the Tim Pool Daily Show, and Timcast IRL destroy the ratings for CNN. And so we may be winning. Digital media just had a bloodbath where they just laid off en masse. I mean, even major newspapers, the LA Times got rid of their DC bureau in election year. The corporate press narrative is failing. Donald Trump's polls are through the roof. People are starting to say enough with the Trump derangement syndrome. It may be, my friends, that facing all of these things, come November, Joe Biden just loses. Trump wins. The world doesn't end. There's no civil war. Trump pulls us back from the brink of World War III. And I like to imagine an optimistic conspiracy theory, an optimistic one, that the efforts we are undertaking are actually the efforts of the deep state. You know, part of me thinks when I see China advocating for illegal immigration and child sex change surgery, that I hope that the true forces of the United States oppose these things and are actually trying to prop up traditional marriage, Donald Trump. Maybe it's all one big psyop to get us to be like, we're punk rock, we support Trump. You know what I mean? I don't believe it's the likely outcome. I just hope that it was the case, right? The idea being that facing these psyops from foreign nations to subvert and destroy the youth, you have this rising and strengthening movement of making America great again, which has called into question some of the more aggressive and egregious liberal and leftist practices that have emerged over the past couple of decades, and is calling for not theocracy or anything, just understanding moral frameworks and being nice and compassionate and taking care of our country, securing our borders, being responsible. But I wonder, who's going to win? Perhaps there is no strong deep state trying to strengthen our borders and bolster our population. It's all just subversive forces at the top trying to burn everything to the ground. But I like to believe, I would like to, that there is some American, pro-America, we're going to win, we're going to crush our enemies and take over. And that really does mean we need people making babies. We need a secure border. We need manufacturing brought back. It's just hard to believe. It is. But I thought about this with Bitcoin, and I'll put it this way. If you were a globalist and you wanted to create a one world currency, but you had resistance across the board, what would you do? You would create the anti-currency, Bitcoin. You would then fight it. Oh, no, it's bad. And then all of the anti-establishment, anti-government forces would line up exactly for your global traceable currency, right? You become the enemy to rally them against you. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying I wish it was, but it's probably not. Because then the reality is the end result of all of this is the resurgence of America, the raising of its flag, the calling out of the far left crackpots, Donald Trump presidency securing the border, bringing our jobs back, no new wars. Would love to see it. But I'm not convinced. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.